Hello, everybody. My name is Charles Cox. I'm a director at LongueVue Capital. It's my pleasure today to introduce Trent Romer. Trent is the co-owner of Albany, New York-based ClearView Bags, which is a manufacturer of custom packaging solutions and also an LVC portfolio company. Trent also serves as LVC's dedicated operating partner for sustainability and supports all of our portfolio companies executing ESG initiatives. So you'll find out today that Trent is very passionate about sustainability and ESG, and without further ado, I'll introduce Trent.
Thanks, Charles, and thank you for the introduction. I'm really excited to be here, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I have a hidden fascination to share. I like to visit and learn about Superfund sites. What are Superfund sites? The Superfund was formed in 1980 to address locations of extreme environmental degradation. Money was set aside for their cleanup. I'd like to tell you about one of them. Nassau, New York is located 3 hours north of New York City and 3 hours west of Boston. It lies on the Massachusetts and New York border in upstate New York. Nassau Lake sits on the outskirts of town. In the early 1900s, Nassau Lake was primed to be a vacation destination with summer homes being built and marinas supporting boating life. From 1952 to 1968, toxic waste was dumped in a nearby landfill set on a raised hill. Streams, small rivers, and underwater aquifers channeled waste to the lake. The lake has been dead ever since. Property values have fallen and health concerns have grown, including higher rates of cancer. The effects have been generational. The lake is still silent today. Nassau is my hometown. I was born there in 1970. The lake has been silent my entire life. Stay out of the lake was all I ever knew. The eastern side of the lake is bordered by a quarter-mile stretch of road. I've been on that road over 5,000 times. I have ignored the lake each time. If the lake was speaking, I was not listening. Not in my backyard is a phrase we all hear. One that says, if it's not my backyard, it's not my concern. Well, this wasn't my backyard, and I still ignored it. There are over 1,300 Superfund sites in America today. 23% of Americans live within 3 miles of a Superfund site. That's 73 million people. I am one of those people. In simple terms, we don't want Superfund sites. I became interested in Superfund sites to better understand what caused them, to help prevent them. My interest is determining what actions we are taking today that can potentially turn in areas into Superfund sites in the future. To find an example, I did not have to look too far. My professional neglect of the environment came to my attention in seeing the June 2018 cover of the National Geographic. The cover shows a grocery store plastic bag poking out of the ocean in the shape of an iceberg with the caption, "Plastic or Planet." I was born and raised in a family plastic bag manufacturing business that began in 1961 by my grandfather. My dad is one of 11. I have 32 first cousins. So our business is very much family owned and operated. The business began in the barn behind the house in Nassau. It has moved 3 times since to accommodate growth. My parents still live there. The business focused increasingly on custom packaging, prints, Ziplocs, mailers, tape bags, and all sorts of markets. Examples of the packaging we make can be found in supermarket aisles, big box stores, and medical facilities. Plastics has been the primary raw material. I knew the benefits of plastics, including protection, elongating shelf life, and lightweighting, but I had ignored how they were made and the end-of-life issue that was becoming obvious. Plastics was increasingly winding up in the natural environment. The National Geographic cover and feature article brought a high level of attention to plastics. I had professionally ignored the end-of-life issue with plastics, just like I had personally ignored the lake. Plastics packaging is not going away. It is expected to double in the next 20 years. without more of an effort to change business models and capture needed material at the end of life to make other things, a global plastic Superfund site seems inevitable. My personal and professional neglect of the environment and effect on the communities bothered me. I began a journey to do something about it. I wanted to find a way for our business to change. We needed to survive to support the 70 people and their families we employed and preserve the environment for the long term. We needed to transition over time to more sustainable products, processes, and business models. A model that uses existing or renewable sources at creation and had a circular end of life. Sustainability education led me to a few unique places. I attended a week-long executive education on sustainability leadership at Harvard University. I went to Amsterdam in the Netherlands to visit a plastic-free supermarket. This is a goofy picture of me with the person at Ecoplaza who showed me around the plastic-free store. I visited Seattle, Washington for a Sustainable Packaging Coalition event where I toured CenturyLink Field. When we got to the stadium, there was that morning, it was like 10 a.m. There was only about 15 people in the entire stadium. And the first thing the tour guide said to us was, there's only about 2 or 3 trash receptacles in the entire facility. I'm thinking, what? And instead, there was recycle bins and compost bins everywhere. The stadium controls the waste. You can't bring anything in, so anything they give you through the gift store or the concession area, they provide. So at the end of the event, the recycling company comes and picks up the recyclables. And there's a composting company that picks up the compost or the waste. The compost company turns that waste into compost. They then sell that compost to local farmers. Those farmers grow vegetables, including potatoes, and the stadium buys back those potatoes to make French fries at future stadium events. So the tour guide said, look, this is not perfect. There's a lot of holes in this. However, that circularity of turning waste into compost, back into potatoes, back into French fries, that circularity was something that had a huge impact on me, and we wanted to bring it back and replicate that in our company. The education led to feedback and actions at our company that included a waste reduction initiative to reduce 150,000 pounds of plastic per year, 3 new sustainable packaging materials to bring to market: certified compostable material, bio-based material, and post-consumer recycled content material. Community outreach efforts to clean up the environment. A change to our company vision: healthy people, healthy planet, healthy company. Where those 3 things intersect, those are the initiatives we want to focus on. It took a few years to determine the right initiatives, set targets, train our internal staff, and achieve goals. The result was authenticity to our program and a book to document it all. The work continues today. The journey is not perfect. There's a lot of missteps and uncertainty, including a lot of self-doubt. Who am I? I kind of thought to myself, who am I to do this? Why am I doing this? I then began to think, how many people own their own plastic bag manufacturing firm? How many people love the environment? How many people grew up next to a toxic lake? I was beginning to think I was one of the only ones who could tell this story. The thought process made me think everyone has a unique angle to help move in a sustainable direction. Our company had found sustainability, at least on a small scale. The changes moved our company in a more sustainable direction and offered new opportunities to provide stable employment. I wanted to bring what we had learned on our journey to more people, to more companies. To do that, I had to better understand the word. Thinking of sustainability through a stakeholder lens helps me better understand the word. There are a lot of stakeholders interested in any organization. There are 8 that are commonly referenced. They're shown on the slide here. Each is increasingly pushing in a sustainable direction. I'd like to highlight just a few. Regulation and reporting surrounding sustainability is growing. The Financial Accounting Standards Board, or FASB, set financial reporting standards in the 1970s. The Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB, was formed in 2011. It seeks to standardize sustainability reporting. I can see where sustainability reporting just like financial reporting becomes standard in the next 10 years. Customers are asking for sustainability. Based on a 2020 World Wildlife Federation study, there has been a 71% rise in online searches for sustainable goods globally. Supply chains are demanding it. A 2021 Governance and Accountability Institute survey found that 92% of the S&P 500 produce a sustainability report of some kind. Big companies are increasingly looking for suppliers to help fulfill their sustainability goals. If a smaller business is selling to a larger one, chances are they will be asked about their sustainability efforts in the future. Investors and creditors are interested in sustainability. Sustainability efforts reduce risk, offer a chance to lower cost, and spark innovation. The big question, why are stakeholders applying pressure to move in this direction? 3 megatrends have emerged in the world today. Global temperatures are rising. 19 of the hottest 20 years were between the years 2000 and 2020. Biodiversity loss is occurring 10 to 100 times faster than the previous 10 million years. And inequality is growing. The proportion of incomes by the wealthiest 10% of global population has risen 30% from 1980 to 2020. These megatrends expose the modern-day Superfund sites of the future if we do not act. So what do we do? When organizations engage in environmental, social, and governance initiatives, they help combat the megatrends. I think of ESG as a more detailed, bucketed approach to sustainability. Sustainability is broken down into 3 categories. E, focused on emissions, waste, and energy consumption. S, focused on employee safety, health, and community welfare. And G, focused on quality of management, board diversity, and mitigating conflicts of interest. Done wrong, ESG is greenwashing. It feels like a money grab. Done right, ESG limits risk, increases opportunity, and increases innovation. So the question is, how do you do it right? This is the focus of my current work, teaching a simple 8-step process to implement sustainability. A Yale University executive education course led me to a framework to help customize the process. Step 1, define the current state. What ESG action is the business already doing? Because they probably are doing some things in these areas. Step 2, benchmark against others. What ESG actions are being taken by others already in the industry? Step 3, gain stakeholder feedback. That previous slide with all those stakeholders, what's important to them? What are the sustainability issues most important to the stakeholders? Step 4, perform a materiality assessment to prioritize sustainability issues. Materiality directs action on issues most important to both stakeholders and the business. So what's important to the stakeholders? What's important to the business? And where those 2 things intersect, those are the issues you want to focus on. Step 5, implement changes to processes and procedures internally to address the issues identified. Step 6, educate the staff internally. Step 7, communicate the issues and what is being done about the issues externally to stakeholders. Greenwashing can be placed on this step-by-step approach. Greenwashing is when the issue is identified in like step 2 and you go right to step 7 to communicate it externally. Authenticating action happens through 4, 5, and 6. And then step 8, periodically review and begin again at the appropriate step. The process is not difficult, but it takes a long-term view and a willingness to act. It produces authentic sustainability actions embedded in the organization. Patagonia offers a great example. It says on their website, the climate crisis is our business. They are not a clothes company with a purpose. They are a sustainability company who happens to sell clothes to support their purpose. There is not one path to sustainability, and there is not a perfect path. Moving in the right direction is the only priority. Only 17% of private businesses have some sort of ESG plan publicized. My goal is to raise that percentage to help all realize they can make a difference. My biggest hope and fear lies in the relationship between our collective influence on ESG. Organizations can have big effects on ESG. My hope lies in knowing what to do. We need to engage in authentic ESG initiatives. My hope lies in knowing why we should do it. We want to prevent future Superfund sites in the form of growing megatrends of climate change, biodiversity loss, and inequity. My fear lies in, will we do it in time? What really terrifies me is if we don't act. If we don't, ESG begins to affect us instead of the reverse. If we don't act, environmental effects like floods, hurricanes, droughts, and wildfires increasingly change the world we know. Negative social effects lead to increasing community health problems, migration, and social unrest. And fractured governance leads to a more chaotic political world. A glimpse of what this looks like is found at the 1,300 plus Superfund sites and 73 million people already affected. Superfund sites tell a heartbreaking story of the past and a cautionary tale if we care to listen. Thank you for your time.
Regarding ESG, and it's going to try to be centralized on the relationship of private equity investors and sell-side advisors as you think about how can you prepare organizations today and in the future to maximize their value and their ESG presence. So there was a recent Preqin study that said the main factor in driving a lot of ESG change within private equity-owned companies are limited partner investor pressure. We just finished our fundraising this year, and I'll tell you that a large amount of institutions, and then we're actually an SBIC, so the SBA really honed in on this, going all the way back, sometimes 15, 20 years to some of our partnerships. In addition to that pressure that you might qualify as from investors, what are some other kind of near-term pressures in addition to the macro picture that you painted that might kind of spearhead and accelerate some of that change?
Yeah, anytime I think about influence, I go back to that stakeholder mentality. And the three that always come up, first and foremost, is regulation and laws. Where is the industry going, whatever industry you're in? Number two is your employees. Try and be as employee-centric as possible. And number three, customers. What do they want? What are they looking for? But I think above all that, I think to implement sustainability to the degree that you want to authenticate it, the business has to understand that it's a good business decision if the right initiative is entertained. So I think looking at it that way is so important to authenticate the journey.
Great. And as shared, you're the co-owner of ClearVue Bags. Maybe it'd be helpful to share some of the initiatives that you've put in place and policies that we're executing on within the E, the S, and the G at ClearVue, which is a plastics manufacturing company.
Sure. I'll always remember when I went and saw our production manager in 2017, and I said, what would you say if we wanted to reduce our internal waste by 25%? He paused, he looked at me, and he said, it would cause us to act in a different way. And I was like, exactly, right? It's exactly what we wanted. And so that set off an initiative it took us a year to do to save 150,000 pounds of plastic scrap a year. And it really had a triple bottom line effect for us. One, we didn't have to buy the material to make the scrap. Number two, we didn't have to use labor and energy to make scrap. And third, we could use that time to run billable product. So that net effect was about $500,000 for our company internally just through that waste initiative. So that's sort of the one that pops out for the E. The S, we got involved in a community outreach effort where we go down to the banks of the Hudson River. So ClearVue Bag is about 3 miles from the Hudson River. The Hudson River is the eastern border of Albany. It's about 3 miles away. And there's a cleanup effort where you go down to the Hudson, and within 50 yards or so of the Hudson River, you're picking up trash. And within just a couple of hours, there's so many trash bags. And you know, if you didn't pick up that trash and all these people didn't, that trash so close to the river was going to wind up in the river at some point and head right down to New York City and into the Atlantic Ocean. And it really made you think, if our country, which has a good waste management system, has this issue and we still have things going into rivers, How about developing countries who don't have a waste management system? So it really tied that into how important that waste management system is. The other thing we do on the S is we chart our employee turnover rate, and we sort of have this benchmark. And when we see peaks and valleys in it, we know it's probably caused by something that's happening internally in the business. And on the G part, I'll just be brief on this. I think you just need to meet about it. I think at the board level, if ESG is a board level agenda item, and then you have an internal committee who's working on these things slowly but surely, you begin to attack it from both areas.
Thank you. And so staying on that same subject, I think the plastics element is frankly kind of clear and very valuable. But if anyone here is invested in a physician practice or more of a office setting or is preparing one of those companies for sale, what are some low-hanging fruit initiatives on the E side?
Yeah, so anytime I think about and begin to engage with different companies, I think it's so important to just listen first and try to understand from their perspective what their business is about, and because it's their journey, it's not my journey. And what you want to do is educate to the degree that you can guide them to start thinking about some of these topics. Now, that said, I think there's 3 or 4 low-hanging fruit that are pretty common to everybody. One is waste management. Number 2 is being employee-centric. Number 3 is your energy consumption. I think those are the 3 areas that you can devote a lot of time to in sort of under that low-hanging fruit idea.
So last December, we were partners with a logistics company, which we sold, and in sort of the 8th inning of the process, we were sort of surprised with a very lengthy ESG due diligence checklist. A lot of it had to do with ethics, social governance, security. What can companies do today to prepare themselves to be more marketable, more valuable? How can they track that? You mentioned the potential regulation, the SASB. What's like a good starting point internally for some of these management teams to undertake?
Yeah, you're not going to like this answer, but I think of this sometimes as sort of that age-old proverb. I don't know if it's a proverb or it's a saying, but it sticks in my mind all the time that says, the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. The next best time is today, right? So the information's out there. The questions that you just mentioned, Charles, they're out there on the internet. You just got to print them out, start meeting about them and talking about them and sort of moving on it and taking action. Because I don't think it's anything more than a commitment and a willingness and looking a little bit more long-term. I think if you're trying to do it on the fly, it's not very authentic. And I think most people will sort of see it that way.
Are there any, you being based in Albany, any states in the U.S. that are a little bit more advanced or have policies or regulations in place that might be a good blueprint?
Yeah, I struggle sometimes with this because right now, for the most part, it's voluntary disclosures. I mean, most of the U.S. is under a voluntary sort of aspect of things, and I do think smart policy and measurement. Anything you can't measure, you can't improve. I sort of buy into that and lean into that, and we need to get there. But that said, California, Washington, Oregon, Vermont, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Colorado are the ones that I read about a lot in terms of rules and regulations and pushing the ball forward on things like extended producer responsibility and things of that nature.
And when people think about ESG, they think about the value. And one thing that's interesting to me is the potential to increase revenue, the top line. You mentioned Patagonia. I think of that company Tom's, to where they have these affordable shoes, and whenever they sell a new pair, they donate a new pair to impoverished children. Are there any businesses that we may know of, public companies or many that you respect, that are worth highlighting in addition to Patagonia?
Yeah, so Unilever is really good. Their carbon footprint, they do a tremendous amount on carbon footprint. Unilever does. Etsy is that company. You sell crafters will sell their items on Etsy, and they do a really good job of offsetting their clients' emissions from transport. That's one of their goals. Liberty Mutual, on the social side, I saw an interview with their CEO or their sustainability manager who said they do a 2-question survey for their employees every month. 2 questions. The first question, do you like working here? Question 2 is, would you recommend to a friend working here? And what they do is they benchmark that. If they see those numbers drop or fall, they instantly know that something's going on within that department or within that business unit to address. And one that I really like is a company called Bread Alone. They are a artisan bread company about an hour north of New York City. We actually print the bags for them. If you go to their website, it's Bread Alone. All over their roof have their solar panels. And they have a little, on the printing of their bags, it says baked by the sun. So they do a really good job of tying their purpose and what they're doing on the environmental side to their actual product in the packaging that they offer.
Great. So I would imagine if I, approached a lot of our portfolio company CEOs, they would say, this is exciting, but hey, I don't have enough time. I'm trying to win new customers. We're trying to expand. We're trying to recruit talent, or I don't know where to start. What's your advice or recommendation to a business owner or management team or an investment banker or private equity firm who's trying to implement ESG when that comes up?
Yeah, I don't think of ESG and the business as 2 separate things. I almost think of them as 2 gears. If you think about 2 gears with notches, when one moves, the other moves. And I think when you think about it that way, and the initiatives that are being undertaken are good business initiatives, I think they should work in concert. If they don't, you're probably doing it wrong. So whatever you're doing on the sustainability front should really work in concert with the business itself.
And that business owner might look at their organization, and there's some easy metrics. One of them might be personnel or diversity, but when you come down to something complex like measuring greenhouse gases, I mean, how do you support a business owner in trying to tackle that?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, the greenhouse gas issue. And I've just sort of looked into this. So without trying to get too far into the weeds and without trying to oversimplify it, there's sort of there's 3 scopes of greenhouse gases. Scope 1 are emissions from the company themselves. Scope 2 is emissions from the energy company who supplied the power to that company for their power needs. Scope 3 is all of the emissions created by the raw materials that come into the company, and then what happens to the product once it leaves the company. What's the emissions for those products once it's out in the field? Scope 3 are really hard to measure. So scope 1, I think you could do. Scope 2, maybe. Scope 3 is really difficult. And there are companies like SCS Global and multiple others who can consult, teach how to do it, and then you can do it yourself longer term. But I think what this uncovers, Charles, is a different way to sell. I think these larger companies are going to be coming to smaller companies and saying, what are your greenhouse gas emissions? We need to hit targets. And if you can go to them with a third-party certified, these are my greenhouse gas emissions, this is what we're trying to do to reduce them, I think that adds a whole nother element to how to sell longer term.
So at ClearVue, in addition to manufacturing the plastic products, there's obviously distribution and logistics. Are you vetting all of your kind of third-party relationships, vendors, suppliers for ESG initiatives?
Not at this point, but it's a great next step for us. I think we've really focused internally, but that second and third step is sort of expanding your reach to your vendors and seeing how they can help you meet your own goals. So that's certainly a layered effect.
And then you mentioned this in your opening, but the term greenwashing, I think there's a lot more momentum on ESG. How do you view that today?
The authentic piece of it is so important. If it's not going to be authentic and it's not going to be a longer term view, I wouldn't even bring it up. I wouldn't even do it. But when you get involved in it, I think the exciting thing that we found is when we started meeting on it and we started to talk about it, there's others in our plant who would just sort of show up at the meeting and be like, oh, I think we could do this, or they had different ideas. I think everybody has this sustainability itch just beneath the surface if you give them a chance to do it. So I think I am ultra trying to steer away from any kind of greenwashing, probably to an extreme. So I think longer term, when it becomes embedded, the greenwashing thing just becomes foreign to the organization.
And from a political perspective, as far as Washington and regulation and politics, there's obviously different stances. I mean, do you think regulation is going to continue to be pushed no matter kind of what the political scenario is?
Yeah, I do. And I think when you, again, go back to that stakeholders, maybe clients are asking for it. Maybe it's regulation. Maybe it's the community. So one of those stakeholders for any business could be really driving the sustainability and ESG initiatives within a company. So yeah, I think regulation is one piece of it. But again, that stakeholder view is really, really important to understand, and how it exactly applies to each individual company is going to vary and change.
Do you think one day ESG will be synonymous with just smart, prudent investing?
Yeah, I mean, just think, say 10 years from now, we'll get into our time machine and make believe here. But you're going to read a financial report, and with it is going to come right next to it a sustainability report. You're going to get both of those. So if this company's finances look great, but they're dumping chemicals in the river, you're going to know that, right? And you want to give people an opportunity to invest in people and companies knowing a more holistic picture. And that's where I think we're all trying to get to.
Great. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm not sure if we have any more questions. Lindsay? I mean, the checklist that we got, it was very genetic, but I'm sure there was a deeper level. That's why I was getting into greenhouse gases. It was a logistics company, and I'm sure that there were, metrics that they shared as far as volume and fuel cost and the miles traveled. I know that the eventual buyer, who's actually a Jordan company, they outsourced a law firm who was just focused on ESG. So I'm sure I could get those metrics from them, but that's something that we've begun with Trent tracking across our portfolio.
I think the hard part too is why there's not been standards so far is because you're trying to put a number on something that's somewhat intangible. And that's where this voluntary disclosure piece has come in. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means it's harder to try and identify what is the standard for, employee satisfaction. What is the standard for, having more sustainable, right, diversity, things like that. It's just harder to come up with a key metric other than sort of stating it. But I do think it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, they asked a lot about employee turnover, frankly, and a lot of that has to do with purpose and how do you quantify that your team has a purpose, that you're instilling change and influencing and being positive. But yeah, it's definitely tricky.
This is something I've struggled with since I started my family office like 20 years ago, because this was an area I wanted to develop. And it's been very challenging because a lot of what we talk about, not necessarily plastic, but we talk about greenhouse gases, we talk about electric vehicles, we like electric vehicles, things like that. One of the challenges, the trade-off, is we have found it very difficult to invest in companies that perhaps do certain things because of the negative consequences of becoming green, so to speak. For instance, electric vehicles, the amount of mining that it requires, the devastation that it requires to produce batteries for electric vehicles, or the fact that now, because of the natural gas, we switch over to that, and now a lot of our electric vehicles are being charged by coal powered things. How do you look? I know a lot of this is convenience driven, and I recently met with Congressman Curtis about this, who is started a climate coalition in Congress.
It's a great question because there is no perfect answer. And I think that's what I tried to express is there's no perfect answer, but I do have really leaned into the two things that really drive the whole process. One, stakeholders. What are stakeholders? Not just shareholders, but stakeholders. What are all of those folks wanting? And number two is this idea of a materiality assessment. What is most material to the stakeholders and the business? And you're constantly figuring that out. You're not doing it once and then letting it go. You're reassessing each time. And really, I think sustainability and ESG suddenly becomes risk-averse strategy, right? You're trying to minimize your risk, and those things can change. To your point, more information is found, and you begin to adjust your stakeholder view, and you begin to adjust the materiality, which allows you to prioritize those things or reprioritize those. So I think it's a constant thing, and there's no perfect answer to your point.
We had another question. Yeah.
Kind of company scale size for size and economic opportunity. When you go to the triangle show what is considered in the market, and what size organization, looking at a paradigm from $10 billion company to the 50 to the 100 million to the $1 billion company, and depending on where they're at what point in time does this start to become a real factor in doing a transaction? So how big does the company need to be that they really need to be aware of this and able to tell the story on these issues?
TRENT is going to be very involved with all of our portfolio companies, add-ons of all sizes. And I think, and like you said, it's not too late or too early to plant a tree. I know that's not a great answer, but at least for LongueVue, I think we're going to implement sustainability and ESG across our portfolio at every size and ask questions for add-ons and companies of every size. I think it'll just become ingrained in our thought process and diligence.
You look at this as like it's maybe part of our integration process.
Right.
But in the screening companies, you're looking at trying to grab, it's about the size of the start looking at these issues.
Yeah, I think it would be any and every company that we would look at, frankly.
What would be immediate and following financial impact of change the policies whatever they are now?
I'm sorry, what was the financial impact?
Yeah, was there an initial adjustment and was it more beneficial? Has it stayed the same? What that was like?
It's more and more beneficial. Now, there's bumps in the road. So we transitioned to a bio-based ink to try and move our inks that we applied to plastic in a better direction. Well, we printed a bunch and realized that in frozen applications, it didn't adhere. Major return, major problem, right? So there has been missteps that we've learned, but I would say about 20% of our inquiries now come to us and ask for more sustainable options. And our compostable, bio-based, and PCR content materials have grown to be about 10% of our overall business right now in 2 short years. So, anytime a customer calls me and says, what can I get a more sustainable option? I think to myself, do you want the 5-minute answer? Because I really want to give you that answer, but you probably only want the 10-second answer, right? And so the 10-second answer is, here's 3 materials, but it goes much deeper than that. And I hope we can get to that depth, because I think bigger customers, they are driving upstream. They got to find suppliers that are going to support their ESG and their sustainability initiatives. And you want to position yourself, or we're trying to position ourselves across the portfolio companies to be in a position to be able to support those efforts. So for us, I think it's sort of taken on a life of its own. We have more people involved in doing it, but from a strictly a sales standpoint, it's opened up a whole new avenue for revenue.
And what would you say to the small business owner where maybe that process of switching, ink cartridges is going to actually increase their cost and they're not as profitable. And they don't see the finish line, or, it's cost prohibitive.
So that's where that materiality assessment comes in. You say, what's important to shareholders and stakeholders, what's important to the business, and maybe what Charles just described is sort of one of these lower initiatives that maybe you get to someday. But there's, I always say, pick 2 or 3 and do them really well and forget about the rest for now, right? Find the ones that make sense for you and your business. There's no one size fits all. And when you find that and you drive value out of it, you drive your employees feel more purpose, and do them really well, and then work on some of the other ones. So I wouldn't do it. If it costs more and it's going to cause a whole new retraining thing, there's probably some other things that are lower hanging that you can attack.
All right, I think we're reaching time. Any more questions? I would just add that we've known Trent for 2 years. He's a phenomenal guy. Please engage him. He'd love to share his passion and ideas to enhance value for your companies. And thank you, Trent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.